Hi, I'm Allie,
And I'm Dahlia.
and this is Navigate the Now. And today we have a special guest. Her name is Katie Oldcrow, fellow former coworker of mine. Shout out Katie. Katie is an educator who also holds a degree in law. And she came to help break down and understand due process on a deeper level and what we are witnessing regarding immigration here in the US as a whole. And so, with that, we want to acknowledge that since we recorded this episode well over 2 weeks ago, we understand that the situation regarding ICE and immigration has really ramped up even more. And we want to take a moment to acknowledge and stand in solidarity with the protests, not only in LA, but around the country. And we also want to acknowledge the unlawful arrests, AKA kidnappings, of human beings. Many people going through proper channels to obtain legal status are being arrested at their court dates, and more places of work are being raided. The rhetoric of removing violent criminals or gang members was a fabricated crisis, was just what I wanted to say.
Yep.
I hope that everybody understands that at this point so that we could essentially get here. This was the goal. And as these stories continue to hit closer and closer to home, I want to let Dahlia step in and touch on a situation that has touched her own family recently.
Thanks, Allie. Well, and before I begin, I just really want to ground us in the reality of what we're living through. The Trump administration is systematically dismantling due process across all branches of government, from weaponizing federal funding to punish universities whose students exercise their First Amendment right, to tearing apart families by detaining and deporting people who are here legally and bravely speaking their truth, as seen in the cases like Mahmoud Khalil, the student activist at Columbia University. And now, I want to bring attention to another life deeply impacted by this authoritarian regime that we're living in. Maria Isidro, grandmother of my niece and mother of Joe Isidro. And this episode that we're dropping is going to be on Friday, so tomorrow, the 6th, June the 13th.
Yes.
And the words that I'm going to read are straight from Joe's own Facebook that he wrote yesterday, June 11th, on his birthday. Happy birthday, son. I love you. That's what my mom said to me just minutes ago on the phone. She wasn't calling from Texas like ICE told us. She wasn't in a detention facility awaiting her hearing that she had this Friday. She was calling from Mexico. She had just been driven across border quietly, secretly, no call, no warning, no goodbyes, no due process. They didn't deport her on a plane. They put her in a van and drove her from Pompano Beach, Florida, all the way to Mexico. A mother, a preacher's wife, a woman who followed every law, attended every check-in, and trusted this country to treat her with fairness. And after all that, the very first thing she said to me was, "Happy birthday, son. I love you." She had just lost everything. And still, her first thought was me. That's who she is. A woman of grace, of love, of God. A mother who deserved dignity and was met with cruelty. Let me be absolutely clear. My mom had two approved I-130 petitions. She had an approved I-246 stay of removal. She had a court date scheduled for this Friday, a legal right to present her case. I lied. They told us she was being transferred to Texas, but instead they deported her illegally before she ever had the chance to speak. They didn't just deport her, they erased her due process and thought no one would notice. But we noticed. This isn't about policy anymore. This isn't about left or right. This is about a government agency lying to a family, skipping court, and driving a human being out of the country like as she was a problem to get rid of. She wasn't a threat. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't undocumented. She had a legal path. She had protection. She had hope. And they took it from her. They took her from us. I'm not sharing this for sympathy. I'm sharing because if this can happen to a woman who followed every rule, it can happen to anyone. This is what a broken system looks like. It's not just red tape, but betrayal. Not just deportation, but dehumanization. We're not letting this go. Our legal team is preparing to fight this with everything we have and take legal action. ICE violated her rights. They violated our trust, and now they'll be held accountable. To those who've supported us, I can't thank you enough. To those who have disagreed with me politically, I ask you, just for a moment, put politics aside. Picture your mother, your grandmother, your sister. Now picture her being lied to, driven out of the country behind your back, and calling you to say happy birthday while standing alone on the other side of the border. This is not justice. This is not America. And this cannot be okay. If this doesn't move us to demand better, then what kind of country are we really becoming? Mm-hmm. Very powerful statement. We stand in solidarity with Isidro family and all who have been impacted. And that is a reflection for all to have. If this doesn't move us to demand better, then what kind of country are we really becoming? So some heavy words, but it's important to educate ourselves to understand what's really happening in this country. So I'm happy to provide this episode on this Friday to talk about due process, to hopefully educate others of what's happening.
Yeah. And Maria's story is just one of, thousands.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
So, thank you, Dahlia.
Yeah.
And with that, I think we'll end and move on to our episode. We really hope that everyone, if you listen to anything, that you listen to that. Mm-hmm. If you share anything, that you share that. So,
thank you.
Hi, I'm Allie.
And I'm Dahlia.
And this is Navigatethenow. And today we have a special guest. Her name is Katie Oldcrow. And Katie is currently a middle school English teacher in Largo, Florida, with 13 years of experience in education. She holds a BA in English with a Juris Doctorate and an MA in teaching. Katie is based in Tampa. She is married to a member of the Cheyenne tribe and is the proud mother of 2 young children, ages 6 and 4. I feel like I should say, hey, Robert. Outside of work, Katie is an avid reader, writer, and traveler who believes in the power of stories and lifelong learning. Her unique perspective bridges education, law, and advocacy. So welcome, Katie.
Welcome, Katie. Florida and the hizzy.
Yeah,
That's right.
Hi, guys. Happy to be here.
Thank you for joining us.
Yes. Well, welcome, Katie. Super happy to have you. You're our first guest outside of New York City, Florida.
Oh,
okay.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
So it's so interesting, all your background. I'm looking forward to deep diving into this conversation with you. But before we get there, we have some community agreements. You can let us know if you agree or if you don't agree. And then you can also let us know if there's anything that you'd like to add.
Okay.
All right?
Yeah.
Sounds good.
All righty. So our first one, speaking in draft does not have to be a polished thought. Number 2, assume everyone is doing their best. Remember, most people have good intentions. Number 3, not here to be right, but to get it right. 4, be present, active listening. 5, be mindful of speaking space, how much time we're taking up.
I always
And
say that is for, sorry, that is for us.
yeah, I was waiting for Allie to chime in. Okay. 6, this is a space to learn and grow. 7, listen to understand instead of listening to respond. And 8, have fun.
Yes.
All right. I
That-
love it. I'm in.
You're in?
I'm in.
Yes. All right. We're
Nice.
all in. You agree. We agree. So let's get started. But I want to know how Allie and Katie met. How did this?
It was one
Friendship start.
warm summer. Katie got a job. Well, where I was teaching, I was a Spanish teacher, and Katie, you got hired as an English teacher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we worked for what? 4 years? 5 years?
I don't know. I
together?
think it was 5.
5?
I think I said 6, but I might have over exaggerated.
Yeah.
It felt like a while.
Yeah, because we got really close really quick and
Yeah.
traveled together. We went to India together. Been to New
We've
York
been a lot of
together.
places together.
Yeah.
DC.
Yeah.
With the students, right? Or like individual traveling?
Yeah, with
With
students.
Oh, with students. Well, that's a
We-
different type of traveling too.
Yeah. We took students to, I'll start off with the light one. We took students to New York City and for Model UN, and it was super fun, but we took them the first night we were there, we went to a pub or something. Katie picked out this pub, and it seemed like it was like an Irish restaurant or something in Manhattan.
Right.
And
We're going there at like 6 o'clock in the evening, not like at 9 o'clock.
yeah, it was
8 o'clock,
daylight. It was like
Yeah.
5 or 6, and we go in there, and it was normal at first. And the kids, we all like order, we're eating, and some business is having like it's like whole. It wasn't formal, but it was like some place got out that was having something, and they all were there in the bar right next to us, and it kept expanding and growing. I feel like, or I don't know. And some girl came over and started talking to all of us. And she lived in Tampa too and was visiting for work. Long story short, the kids, they weren't like, short of not drinking any alcohol, they weren't. The kids were like fully involved in this happy hour with these adults, like sitting and having a great time, and like,
I
oh my God.
I think somebody was trying to teach them how to play darts. Like they were.
Oh
It was a
man.
mess. It was a mess. But we looked around. We were like, we got to pull them out of here.
Yeah.
Like, eventually here. Because they're hanging. They didn't know that they were hanging out with like inebriated, or they weren't like bad, but they were probably a little more open than normal.
Yeah, it
Like,
was happy hour. It was happy hour.
yeah.
Or
Yeah.
happy.
Everybody was cordial and polite, but like the adults were a little overly enthusiastic. So
Yeah. Yeah.
and then we went to India. We took like 50 people, and
Yeah, and that
we
was
went to-
crazy.
we went to a holy festival, and it was crazy, and it was like hundreds of thousands of people literally, and we had to get out of there. So that was a more intense experience. So
How old were the kids, or what was it? Grade?
Middle school age, so
Middle
yeah,
school?
we had 6th through 8th, yeah, and their parents with us, yeah.
yeah.
But it was
Yeah.
wild. I mean, you go to a place like India with people like that, and you're bonded for life.
yeah. Yeah.
I bet.
Yep, exactly. And Katie has 2 kids that go to the school where she teaches at. They're
I
super
do.
cute.
They are cute.
And
How old are they?
They're 6 and 4.
Oh, 6 and
So
4, that's
my
right.
daughter's 6, my son's 4. Yeah. So we're going into 1st grade next year, and then preschool still.
kindergarten graduate.
Cute.
Aww.
Adorable.
I think that I feel like that's most of our history.
Yeah.
In a nutshell.
In a nutshell.
In a nutshell, yeah.
Well, I love it. I'm here for it.
I mean,
yeah.
we love to sit around. We love to talk politics. And like
Yeah.
the last time Allie was in town, I'm like, okay, what do you think about this, this, and this? You know,
Yeah.
so
We like to drink and talk a lot of shit.
yeah, that's it.
But that I always leave, and I'm like, that's how you know that they're like your good friends, because you all just kind of like make fun of each other the entire time,
Yes, yes,
or give each other a hard time.
yes.
So it's good.
No
It's
hold
good
back
stuff.
No hold
No
back.
hold back. No holding back.
No.
Yeah,
Well, sounds like a perfect guest for our podcast.
that's right.
Talking
No
shit,
holding
talking
back.
politics.
No hold back.
Yes, spitballing.
Just spitballing.
So, Katie, if you would, can you share with us then your background in law And
Yeah.
education. I mean, like you said, it's bridge, but first starting off in
Right.
law, since that's what you're going to be talking about. But
Right. Yeah. So I feel like this is kind of a long story about how I got where I am. Like, obviously, law and education, they're not the same realm of places, but it does all make sense. I feel like once you hear it all. So I'm not originally from Tampa. I'm actually from the Northern Kentucky, Cincinnati area originally. Very conservative area, definitely red. And growing up, I was definitely surrounded by that more conservative crowd. I mean, I know Allie and I have talked about this before. My mom, like her mom, was like Miss Reagan, Republican, voted Republican pretty much her whole life up until recent elections. And then,
yeah.
like I had a dad who was super hippie, super liberal, but also like wouldn't claim the Democratic Party. He just wanted nothing to do with politics. He thought he's like that guy that's like nobody can fix it. They're all crooked kind of thinking. So really when I was in high school and kind of deciding what I wanted to do with my life, it's kind of this trifold of how I ended up in law school. And one of the pushes was from my mom, actually, who was very much like, she had been in a series of bad marriages, and her words to my sister and me were always, hey, you're going to be independent, you're not going to depend on a man, and you need a good job that you can support yourself.
Very
And
sound advice.
right. And her model for that was her cousin. She had a cousin who was like a couple years older than her that did that. And she was a lawyer. She was top of her class at UC Law, and then, like went into big law firms. So she kind of did push me in that direction. But then in high school, I had a teacher, an English teacher, which is kind of ironic here, who was a lawyer. She had been a former lawyer turned English teacher. And she also became a huge role model in my life, and she pushed me into that direction of law. And she also taught me the To Kill a Mockingbird was the one of the books in her curriculum. So those three things combined really is what kind of got me into this direction of law. So, and this teacher, she even had direction in where I went to college. She was setting me up for law school. So I went to U of L. I was actually a Mitch McConnell scholar at the University of Louisville. Yeah,
Okay.
which is actually a bipartisan program. To the outside, it doesn't appear that way, but they do
Yeah.
they select 10 students in the state of Kentucky, and they try to choose a range, half Republican, half Democrat students. And then I also majored in English because she told me, if you want to be a lawyer, you're going to have to read, you're going to have to write a lot, and that major is what's going to set you up for law school. So, doing the English thing and then the McConnell Scholar thing, which was heavily involved with political science. So I have that dual combination there. So then
That's really cool.
Right. So then I went to law school, and I just hated it. I hated law school. It was
Yeah.
not, it's not what people say. They're like, oh, you can argue, you should go to law school. No, that's not why you should go to law school.
Not because you're really good at arguing. Like that's not
Right? That is not
and a
the
reason to
reason.
go. That doesn't
Not
make you
the
a good
reason.
lawyer.
It does not make you a good lawyer. What makes you a good lawyer is killing your creativity skills and solely thinking with critical thinking skills. Like we praise critical thinking skills, but they really have to be combined with some creativity. And that's what I didn't love about it. Like it sucked my creative soul out of me. There was nothing there. Like to the point where I'm on summer break or winter break and I'm devouring books and writing because it's the first time that I can experience a hobby or something of the arts, because there was no time. But what I did love when I was there, there were two things that I loved. I loved constitutional law. And I always say, which is why I'm here talking about due process, because that's involved with this.
Yeah.
But I always say, if I could have just jumped and been like an appellate level attorney or a judge, then maybe I would have stuck with the law because that's what I liked. But takes a lot to get to that. And then the other thing that I love doing in law school, you have to do, and even as you continue to be an attorney, you have to do some pro bono hours. So I had done my pro bono in law school teaching the diversion program. So what that is it's your at-risk youth, juveniles, who are going through the criminal justice system, usually for nonviolent crimes, for the first time, right? So in order to kind of get off the hook in juvie court, the judges send them through a diversion program. So it's like a 10-week course, and they would be in front of someone like me, and I'm teaching them about the law. Like, I'm teaching them their rights. What are their rights? Like, how to prevent themselves from being within the court system again. And, you know,
I was just going to say, shout out to all my friends that were in diversion in high school.
that was me teaching y'all, right? Yeah.
You know who you are. Sorry, that's all I was going to say.
But, you know, like, what's really sad about this diversion program is, like, these aren't bad kids. You know, they shouldn't be in the court system. A lot of them, honestly, were truant. I mean, that's why they were there. Most of them just weren't showing up to school. But I just loved teaching. I love teaching those classes. And I decided this is my second year of law school, and I'm like, all right, I kind of know I don't want to be a lawyer, but I'm going to finish. I've got a year left. Like, I'll go ahead and just work through it. And I'm studying for the bar exam. I graduate. And one of my best friends calls me up, and he kind of knew, you know, how I was feeling about the law. And he goes, hey, at the high school I teach at, there's an opening for an English teacher position. He goes, you should apply. And I kind of thought about it, and I was like, well, you know, I don't even know if I'm going to pass the bar. I don't know till September. I don't have a job. I don't have anything lined up. You know, why not? So I apply for it. I get it. And I start teaching, and I really like it. But I'm also going into it thinking, you know, I'll just do this for a couple years. I don't have a teaching degree, so I'm emergency certified, and I'm like, so I can do it for 2 years without further certification, and then I'll figure out what I want to do. But obviously I stuck with it, and after those couple years, I decided to get my master's so that I could continue to do it, and that's where I am today. So I'm decided that is my passion, is teaching, sticking with teaching. Yeah.
Nice. Nice. I've never heard your whole story before, so I enjoyed hearing that.
Yeah, I was thinking that you had it. Yeah.
No, I knew you studied law, but I didn't know, like, the background behind it or anything other than I knew you went and taught English. And then you went and got your master's, right?
Right. Yeah, so I got my master's in teaching.
Yeah.
I really love that you went from, like, lawyer base to teaching and education, which is, like you mentioned already, completely different.
Right.
I would say even more important. Lawyers get their, you know, people love the lawyer degree or whatever, but education, that's an important job right there.
It is.
That's where the change happens.
It is. And I always think it's a really cool story because the person that inspired me to go to law school ended up being a teacher. Like, I'm in her same position. I did exactly what she did. Went through it, but then went to teach. Yeah.
What was her name? I feel like we should say her name.
Her name was Marie Mellish. She actually passed away when I was in college. But her ex-husband is a judge in Kenton County in Kentucky, and I mean, to this day I stay in contact with him. And
Nice.
it's really sweet. I mean, he's helped me in a lot of ways through my professional and personal life too. Yeah, I enjoyed it.
I love that. Dahlia, you have a teacher in your family as well.
I
So
do.
I know you. Yeah.
Yeah, my oldest sister is a teacher.
Yeah. What does she teach? What is it? Fourth?
I think it was like third grade.
Third grade.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I know that my niece is also interested in teaching. So
Is
we'll
she?
see. Yeah, we'll see what Raquel does. But
Yes. Shout out to Raquel. and Nydia. Thank you for being a teacher, Nydia, as well. Yeah, we do. We need teachers.
It's important work.
And it's not as glamorous as being a lawyer, but it is important work.
Right.
And being a middle school teacher is really something special. Katie's teaching middle school, and I was a middle school teacher, and it's intense.
It is intense, but you know what? Those are formative years.
Yes. I almost feel like I kind of miss arguing with people now that I'm not teaching middle school. It's a
Right?
lot of
Are you
arguing.
arguing with a student? Is that what you're doing? Wait, what?
Yeah.
That's
It's a lot
That's
of
weird.
There's
You're like,
opinions. There's a lot of opinions
there's a
about
lot
it.
of they're giving you, they know everything and they're telling you, and they
Ah.
like when you're in middle school, you reach this point where like you start to understand things, but you don't have a filter. Like in high school, the kids start to recognize like I shouldn't say that, or like I know there's a time and a place, or like that's not respectful. Middle school kids don't have that at all. So, you know, like you gained 10 pounds. Are you pregnant? Like what's going on with you? And so you're going to be fighting for your life every day.
Why did you cut
And
your hair like that?
yeah,
Why did you get
yeah,
bangs?
yeah.
well, maybe
My
your
mom,
college students should take a note and start arguing with you, or
yeah,
so you can
they
get
don't
that
argue
back
with
in your
me.
life.
Yeah, yeah. But I miss the mouthy middle schoolers.
Yeah.
For sure. For sure. All right. Well, so Katie, we're going to keep ourselves moving.
All
So
right.
going from teaching, but now returning back to law and the Constitution and immigration. I know you have a lot of thoughts, and I always wonder, I miss sitting out at break with you and like hearing what you think. So I'm excited to hear what you think, and get your thoughts on what we're seeing as far as due process and immigration.
Yeah.
Yeah, can you give us your perspective on how you think it's being handled
Yeah,
currently?
so okay, so I think really like we just need to start with what due process is. I think it's kind of a confusing concept for some, and
Yeah,
especially because there's two types of due process. So
I didn't know that.
yeah, so there's procedural due process, which is mostly what we're talking about here, right? Procedural due process is like your right to an attorney, your right to a hearing, your right to notice, your right to your charges read to you. But then you also have substantive due process as well. And actually, some of the cases that we're seeing do deal with both. And we can talk about that a little bit, especially what we're seeing with these college students who their visas are being revoked because they're speaking out because of speaking out in political ways. That's a substantive due process issue because now it's affecting inherent rights that we have. Then that's substantive due process. We could go on and on about that whole area because substantive due process is these rights that aren't written
Uh-oh.
in laws anywhere, but that the courts give us. So, like a right to privacy, right? So, all the contraception, like women have a right to contraception. That's a substantive due process right. Up until recently, abortion would fall under that category as well. So we're kind of seeing like a problem with the substantive due process too. But like when we're talking about these deportations, we're talking about this procedural part. And both of those rights kind of come from two different amendments. It comes from the Fifth Amendment and the 14th Amendment. And basically, like these two amendments give us due process. One gives us due process in regards to like federal government. So that's the Fifth Amendment. That's how we have these rights in regards to trials through the federal government. But then the 14th Amendment then applied it to the states. So all around, we should have due process. And due process here applies to everyone. This isn't something that's just applicable to U.S. citizens or even visa holders. This is like you have your foot on U.S. soil, you have a right to due process.
Yeah.
It's people. It's not based on citizenship. And that's something that's kind of really been upheld by the courts for years and years, that aliens even are entitled to due process, especially when we're talking about here in regards to deportation proceedings, which is what we're seeing.
Can I ask then, how are they
Yeah.
keeping it upheld right now?
Oof, that's a heavy question because I'm not quite sure they are. I think that these lower courts are trying. Like we're seeing this, they're blocking some of these deportations. Like they are sending or telling this administration, if you want to call it that, or a regime, the way it's acting. These courts are kind of saying, no, you cannot do this. You have to release people, send people back. You can't do this. However, they're not really following what the courts are saying. And then,
Right.
and these things are having to make their way up to the Supreme Court. So it's a little bit dangerous. But I will say one thing that I do think that people maybe don't fully understand about these proceedings and this court is it's not criminal court. So
Right.
immigration court, it's not run the same. And, even though these people have a right to due process, the courts aren't run the same way. So the court itself isn't held to the same standards as like a criminal as a criminal court. So for instance, in immigration court, documents don't have to be authenticated. Hearsay is admissible, whereas these things wouldn't happen in criminal court. There's little defense. And then so deportation hearings in particular under immigration court, they're considered civil cases for the most part, because being in this country illegally up until recently is they've tried to change some of these laws. It isn't a crime. It's not considered a crime. So you're not going to criminal court where you're going to receive the same protections. So it's considered a civil offense. And yes.
Question, if
Sure.
I may. Hand raised.
Okay.
So you said, is there civil offense and then criminal offense?
Yeah.
What's the difference between a civil offense and a criminal offense?
So, a criminal offense, you could be jailed, right? You could pay a fine, those sorts of things. You've committed a crime. You've committed what we consider a crime. But a civil offense is something kind of lighter. This is something that it's almost like more like being sued is what the equivalent is, which is kind of odd. And I think that's the great debate in this area is how can this be a civil offense issue when somebody's life is literally at stake here. The stakes are too high. So I think that's like an inherent problem with these cases already being categorized as if this was like some sort of almost like if you're in a car accident and you sue the insurance company. That's a civil case, right? So you're equating this to that essentially.
I've read it's like a parking ticket.
Right. Yes. Or like getting a parking ticket. But if you get a parking ticket, you're not going to be sent out of the country forever, right? So, or split up from your family. So I think there's just an inherent problem already with the classification of these cases and how they're run through the courts. But, because most of these people, when they're going through the deportation hearings, they're not charged with a crime, then guess what? If it's a civil case, your due process rights aren't as guaranteed. Okay.
That was going to be my question. Was almost like because it's a lighter offense, they're not guaranteed stronger rights.
Right. So,
Okay.
like, for instance,
Wow.
we all have a right to an attorney, right? That's an inherent. I think everybody knows that under due process of law, you have a right to an attorney. And if it's a criminal case, your life is at stake, right? Life, liberty, or property. The government is required to provide one for you if you cannot afford one. These cases, that's not the case. The government does not have to provide one if you can't afford one. And that's why we're seeing some of these people in immigration court without attorneys because they simply can't afford one. And then one is not being provided for them.
Right. And then
That's
if they don't have an
fucking
attorney,
crazy.
Right. It
there's
is
less of a
crazy.
chance of them being able to win whatever, winning their case or
Right.
somebody standing up for them.
And the problem is you don't have an attorney. So guess what? These people go in there and then they say, well, yes, I entered illegally, or they admit to the charges and then they're out. So they don't have any defense. I mean, there's really no defense here.
That is something I 100% did not understand.
Yeah.
Was that it's because when you hear that it's a lighter offense, you think, okay, so it should be easier than a crime to, I don't know.
I'm getting off on the charge, right? Like,
Yeah,
you're not going to be
yeah.
accused or whatever.
But it's
Yeah,
almost
but
like it's not
it's
almost,
war.
it's
It
working
is.
against it.
Yeah.
Working against them, or it's working against, yeah.
It is. It's like and I'm sure, there's reasons for this, but it very much feels like a way to get around the proper avenues that should be provided. It
I
feels like the system's stacked, you
I
know?
feel like I feel like somebody is knowingly exploiting the system right now.
Absolutely. I mean, and you think about the
I mean, yeah.
fact.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, but I'm sorry. I'm so passionate about this and so angry about it. But
No, yeah.
but you think about, the you have someone who probably also doesn't speak English or doesn't understand English fluently, and they're coming from most likely a lower economic status. They can't afford attorney. They have no idea what they're walking into a courtroom like this.
Katie, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
How about for the people who say, well, they came here illegally?
Ugh. Ugh. That's how I feel about these people. Ugh.
Say more.
Right? I don't know how I feel about this whole they came in here illegally. A lot of people, they are coming here and following the proper avenues.
Right.
And
Right.
if something has happened, a lot of time it's like maybe like a green card expired or something like that. I feel like the majority of people have followed the proper avenues. And if they haven't, you know what? They've most likely have been fighting for their lives to get into this country.
Yeah.
I think that's something that when our guest Monica was on, she said, well, there's just so many, like there really isn't a way, really.
No, there's not. And well, and that's part of the problem too. Now it's becoming the whole immigration process is like backlogged. It's a mess. There's not a good system in place right now. Um, like, we don't have a really great way for people to immigrate into this country. I don't think. Yeah, it's underfunded. I mean, it's being politically weaponized. We're seeing that. So, yeah.
Now, I mean, I have this thought. Let me see if I can put it into the right words. There's a benefit too for the American government to have folks who are undocumented. One thing that I didn't realize until just a few years ago is that people who are undocumented pay taxes.
Yes. Yes. They
They
do.
pay taxes. So, and then we get like this cheaper labor force, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they're paying into a lot of the service that they're not going to benefit from, but just with the idea of maybe one day being able to become a citizen.
Right. I mean, our whole economy is really dependent on immigrant workers right now, and I think that as this continues, we're gonna see things crumble if we keep doing this. I mean, there's already so many reports out there about people who aren't showing up to work or showing up to school just out of fear. So I think we're just in the beginning stages of actually seeing the effect of what this is going to do when we don't rely on the immigrant workers in the country.
But how about the bad hombres?
And I definitely wanted to know, what do you think about U.S. citizens being detained when they're coming back from being abroad and their devices are being checked?
Yeah.
Because I feel like I'm like a prime suspect, number one. If they ask me to give them
Oh,
my
for
phone,
sure, for
like, well,
sure. Me too.
yeah.
Me too. We're both going under.
For what, once they got on my phone, I understand that I'm a
Yeah.
white lady, but like, I'm
Right.
like, oh man, if they were to open my phone, I'd be fucked.
Yeah, yeah. So legally, if we're talking from the legal sense of it, they can do that.
Yeah.
It's totally
Yeah.
legal, right? They have full reign to stop anybody at the border. They can search without warrant or clear cause. However, it does challenge our assumptions about our own constitutional protections. And even though they can legally do this border exception for now, I think that it's being interpreted extremely broadly, and that's not going to play out forever. I think that eventually the courts are going to have to rule on this. We're watching American citizens losing rights that we've
Right.
always thought we were guaranteed, and that goes to that substantive due process, what I was talking about, like our right to privacy here when they're going through our phones at the border. And like you just kind of mentioned, any of us with a social media footprint of speaking out against this government, we're likely to be stopped. We don't know who they're looking for or who they're following. um and then then there's this added issue. I'm sure one of the instances that you're thinking of is that immigration attorney. You guys heard about that, right? The immigration attorney, and they wanted his client list, right? So now you're also not only talking about like violating our constitutional rights, but now there's an issue with like a attorney-client privilege at that point. So there's some added problems with this. So even though it's legal, yes, but I think eventually these courts are going to have to get involved and say, no, you can't do this to everyday Americans all the time. There's got to be a little bit of cause here to do that.
Yeah, I feel like the tactic is just try everything
Yeah, it
on
is.
their end. I was listening today to them talk because Harvard's like in the throes of it right now with them
Yeah.
with the administration, and I loved hearing that they said Harvard is using his tactics back in that they are not complying with anything and making them like they're taking every single thing to court or to out to play, which is interesting.
It's
And
good. It's good. We
yeah,
need more. We need more people or institutions like that who are gonna fight
yeah.
back a little bit. Um,
Why do you think a lot of institutions don't?
Fear. I think a lot of it's fear. And it's kind of crazy. I mean, we're seeing fear all around, but uh, the people mostly that are contrary to this administration right now, I think that we are seeing are these judges who are ruling against him. And I don't know if you've heard of this or not. The What is it called? Swatting. Have you heard of this? Swatting, where
No, I have
people,
not.
oh God, this is so scary. They pretend they're in the home of like a judge or someone and say, there's a shooter in the house, whatnot. And the SWAT team arrives into that person's home.
What?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
And
maybe I
there's,
have heard of this.
yeah,
Yeah,
but there's some reports of that happening, I think, to some of these judges. And then the other ones, like the pizza, like fake pizza
I've
deliveries.
I've heard the
Yeah.
pizza deliveries as like tactic of uh what's the word I'm looking for?
Like we know where you live and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
what's this pizza thing? Some people are delivering pizzas to people's houses.
It's sorry. Uh Intimidation. They're trying to intimidate these judges and they're sending I don't know if they're sending a bunch of pizzas to them, but it's this we know where you live.
yeah, so I honestly think it's more than just political fear. I think that people are actually like in fear for their safety. And yeah, and it's like anybody that goes toe to toe with him, they're in for it. They're gonna go through the ringer.
Yeah. Well, so what might we expect to happen in the future, Katie?
Well,
I know you kind of said it.
it's a little grim right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's grim. I okay, so I was reading this article today actually about, I think it was this professor of law in University of Chicago, and he was talking about 1930s Germany, and he was talking about, I think it was a professor had written a book. It was called something like the dual state. That's what it was called, the dual state. And what happened in Germany is similar to what he's saying is happening here within regards to the courts. And basically meaning there's two states here of what we're seeing. We're seeing courts work for U.S. citizens and a normalcy in one avenue. And then, but over here, in regards to all of this immigration and deportation and the erosion here of due process, it's totally different. It's opposite, right? These are opposites. But what he was discussing was this is how they do it, right? It's this othering. You go to this other group and you test, kind of like what you said, Allie, throw whatever to the wall, see what sticks. So they're trying it out over here first. But eventually, if we're saying that's okay, which a lot of Americans are right now, right? They're saying that illegal immigrants don't have a right to due process, which is mistaken, because if that can happen over there, then it's going to come happen over on the other side of the courts as well. It is kind of what they do. They take a little bit away at a time, see how it works, see how people react to it, and then they're going to do a little bit more. And even mimicking Nazi Germany, it's kind of like, I always say, or I teach my students, I teach the book Night every year. And one of the big topics that we always talk about is, how did this happen? How did they get there? And what we see in that book, or something that we always talk about, is this mentality of, okay, well, if this is the worst thing that they do, well, I can live with that. If that's the worst thing they can do, then I can live with that, and that's okay. And then they do one more thing worse. Okay, but if that's the worst thing, okay, then that's okay. I can live with that. And it just feels like we're kind of falling into that trap a little bit.
Kind of going back to the idea that, it's not going to happen to us.
Exactly.
It's not going to happen to me.
Right.
It happens to the other person, to others.
I think that term, the othering, has come up on every episode. I just wanted to say that. Like when you brought it, I was like, oh my gosh, we had a whole talk about the othering last time, and it's
a powerful tool. It's a very powerful tool to make a group of people either feel superior.
Which is why it's important to show up without fear. And like do a podcast or
with a little fear,
a little fear, but
do it regardless, right?
Yeah. That's been my motto, is I can't shut up, or I can't hold up. I got to hold the wall, right?
Yeah. And what is that number? I'm sure you guys have seen that is that like 3.5% of the population pushes back on authoritarianism. Then it fails. It's something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a really small percentage, but it's like, if just this amount show up, authoritarianism doesn't work. Like, you need this many people to show up and push back. And I will say, with all my grim talk there, I will say I think we have some power in this generation, in the fact that social media, it's a blessing and a curse. But we can connect. We can connect quicker with people. People are more in the know, which wasn't the case, in 1930s Germany. People were much more isolated. And I mean, you can make the argument that we're isolated more mentally or in our homes, but I think we're all connected. It's much easier to stay connected, which is a powerful tool to have against these sorts of authoritarian regimes.
Yeah. Well, we have a whole new issue coming to rise, which is, I've seen it every day on the news. I just saw Stephen Miller,
Oh gosh.
my favorite person, talking about habeas corpus. So I feel like that came about even after we asked you to come on, and so I thought, well, that would be a great thing to bring up as well, because I don't know very much about habeas corpus, or
Habeas corpus is such a, it's probably one of the first things you learn in law school. Just the basic legal principle that protects us from unlawful imprisonment. It literally means, I think, of the body, or you shall have the body, or something like that. But it's basically saying that we all have this right to not be imprisoned without just cause or for fair trial. I mean, that's what it comes down to. And our buddy here, Stephen Miller, he's looking to, right?
Oh
He's
my God,
looking
he's so
to,
gross. He's so gross. I hate him.
it's like just everything about him. His like bald head and his, ugh.
There was some video that surfaced of him in college speaking out for something, and it was like, why do I have to clean up stuff if there's a janitor? And he says it,
Oh,
and it's
he's
just
a
it's so
guy.
sleazy. Sorry, Dahlia. He helped write Project 2025 as well. I don't know if. Anyways.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I'm looking at his photo right now. That's quite the receding hairline that he has.
oh,
Sorry.
he's so gross. So gross.
Yeah. He's just evil. Like really, you like how you observe somebody is so much based on their personality. And, I think if he was like a really good guy, I'd be like, oh yeah, well, he's kind of goofy, but he's fun loving, he's
But he's
cute.
not
But
funny.
if you're evil and
Evil and a white supremacist,
yeah, it
different story.
really kills the vibe.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, so he's like, we're actively looking at suspending habeas corpus, right? In order to deport people faster. That's the reason.
Okay.
And Congress is up in arms about it because, they technically cannot do that without Congress. However, I will say, historically, and honestly, Allie, your husband would be a much better person to ask about this part because I'm sure he knows more than I do. But, Lincoln famously suspended habeas corpus during the Civil War. And he did that, and he did do that without Congress's approval. I do believe he retroactively got it, like went back and got it later, but essentially argued that he needed to suspend it because of some rebellion or whatnot. Now, that's the problem. This, and in conjunction with, if you also hear a lot in the news, the Alien Enemies Act. Both of these things shouldn't be done. Neither one should be done except in a time of war.
That's what Ben keeps saying. Who's my
Okay.
husband? He's like, you're not, habeas corpus is for when you're in battle or something, or like at a time of war. That's what I've heard him say over and over again.
Yeah. That there has to be a declared war. And then if there's a declared war, well, Congress is a part of that as well. So I don't know. I mean, I think this is really interesting how they're going to spend this. I think that they are trying to figure out how do you spend this war on immigrants, because that's what it is. It's like your war on drugs, your war on terrorism. And we saw it during 9/11, right? I mean, kind of, they didn't take it this far, but the Patriot Act and a lot of our rights were suspended in a way in the digital surveillance that came after 9/11. So I think they're using that precedence along with, these acts that fall under wartime. They're trying to amp it up. They really are. They're trying to amp this up. And I don't know how this is going to go.
It's interesting because we hear war on immigration, like two people are going to perceive that totally different.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Like.
Yeah, I mean, that's how we always end up in these situations, right? What is the threat? There's a threat to national security, and you have a group of people who don't believe that there is a threat there too, right? Like, I don't think that I don't know if I necessarily believe that there's a major threat or a threat of national security that warrants us losing our constitutional rights over immigrants, right? But we saw it in post 9/11, and guess what? That was racially charged. We also saw a lot of racism against the Muslim community during that time. And the other major time that I can think of, again, that this also happened where habeas corpus was suspended was during the Japanese internment camps. And again, racially charged, incredibly racially charged time where people were putting out a lot of racist news articles. I mean, even out in California, and I always show these for primary documents to my students. We read They Called Us Enemy by George Takei, and he talks about his time in a Japanese internment camp as a kid. And we look through these primary documents, and the things that the media was putting out about Japanese people is just horrendous. But it seems like that's the trend. That's what happens. There's a proclaimed national security threat along with a mix of racism. Those two go hand in hand for these
Yeah.
things.
It's like when, the White House putting on photos of all the illegal immigrants that they've deported and with everything that they've done wrong, like really highlighting things and just pushing a narrative that doesn't really speak to what's actually happening, right, with the immigrant community.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not. They have to tell a story.
Yeah. What can I ask you one last thing about what do you make of the Kilmar Garcia case then?
Oh my goodness. I just think that this is awful. How you can make what was an administrative error, send someone to El Salvador and then not bring him back and have been ordered to, right? The court has said you have to facilitate his release. I don't think the court specifically said you have to bring him back to the United States, but you have to facilitate his release. And nothing's been done about that. I not only is it just awful for this person and his family, but this is scary for us too, as
Right.
a nation, that we have the executive branch ignoring the orders of the Supreme Court. And it's like, where is the checks and balance there? Well, what can they do
Right.
to enforce that? You can't use any of the law enforcement, right? They also fall under the executive branch. So how do you enforce your own rulings? How do you enforce your own holdings as a court? And I think I also read recently that the Supreme Court is working to have its own independent security. And I don't think it's necessarily going to be set up to deal with these issues, but even just something that's independent of the executive branch, because they're not trustworthy
Yeah.
right now.
Hold on, can you repeat that again? You're saying that they're creating another branch
Like a security. Yeah, they're creating, I think I read this, it was on the Wall Street Journal the other day, that the courts are looking into essentially having their own security force of some sort, because it has to be independent of the Justice Department within the executive branch, because of the way, my understanding from it was because of the way the executive branch, like all of this talk about judges and, like they're bad judges or they're corrupt judges, as soon as they make a ruling against him.
Yeah, they need to protect themselves.
I think that's the start, is a protection there, but from what I'm understanding, I don't know if that will turn into something that they feel like they need to do in order to enforce their rulings, because I think that's like, now we're finding all the holes in our government, right, in our checks and balances, and that's one
A
of
lot
them.
of holes.
Yeah, this is a huge hole. How do you enforce if you are an independent branch here? How do you enforce if you're separate from another branch? How do you enforce that? And we don't have a way right now.
Yeah. Or I was thinking when you said it, or like you're enforcing something that affects those people that are supposed to protect you.
Yes.
Which is a major conflict of interest.
Right. Lots of
So-
conflicts of interest too. We're seeing that too.
Well, Katie, do you
Yes.
have any other additional perspectives that you'd like to offer on kind of just what we're seeing?
Well, one thing that I was just going to bring up is I think everybody should be mindful of is that, the Supreme Court's about to release its June decisions this next month. So, there's some cases out there about this one, the big one about birthright citizenship. That's going to be a huge one to look out for. I would hope that there's enough sense within the Supreme Court to uphold something that's in our Constitution. But
Right.
you never know. You never know with this one. I think there's some issues about transgender care for minors. That's going to be important. LGBTQ books in schools is another one. I think another case that's on the dock. So lots of big things to keep an eye out for in June. I've got lots of opinions on all the current events. So,
Yes, we were in the throes of book censorship in Florida for anybody who's
yes.
not aware. I mean, everybody knows what's going on, which was honestly I haven't really talked about this on here, but it's kind of a decision that catapulted us to Ohio. Was my husband's AP psych course got canceled. And then he was also told if he addressed a student by their pronouns. Well, let me go back. His AP psych course got canceled because it discussed gender and sexuality, which if your AP is an independent institution that, that is the organization that puts on AP courses, is College Boards, and which does the ACT. They do a lot of stuff, but it got canceled because Florida deemed it inappropriate because of gender and sexuality topics, which this course has been around forever. It's crazy. And then he was also told his last year of teaching that, like, essentially if a student requested to be called by a pronoun that might obviously be different than their paperwork, but that he was legally required to tell the parent.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I remember us sitting there and he, and he said, what do I do? Or, I mean, not what do we do, but it's shocking, which it makes me think of that baby step, like you were saying, keep pushing and seeing what you can get away with. And we had to say, you know what, if you get fired, you get fired. It is what it is. But in the public school system, it just felt squashing. So, and then full disclosure, he did have a student that requested, different pronouns than were stated on their record. And so it was fine, obviously, because nobody found out, I guess. But yeah, it just got really frustrating, which is really nice. I mean, yeah, I felt like to work in Florida in the school system, you got to be at a private school. And how many private schools are at the school like in which we're at, which is literally a progressive private school?
Yeah. Yeah, all my
So
books are banned. Every single one of them. All the books I teach are banned.
Oh, really?
Pretty much.
I was going to say, and I'm sure it's a pricey tag, a price tag, right? To go to the type of school that you teach at in order to get,
Oh, yeah.
I would say, like a well-rounded education.
Yes.
For sure. For sure. Oh, okay. So I don't know why I said, oh, okay, like that, but I just realized. So Katie, I don't want to forget, I'm going to keep us moving though, because I know you got to go to bed, but I know. So then moving on to thinking of tools, I know we're all in our state of overwhelm, which is kind of why Dahlia and I brought this to the table in general, this podcast. So what's a lesson or tool you'd offer someone currently to navigate what's going on?
So I thought about this, and I got a couple different things to say. I think the big one, and I know you guys have talked about this already on your other episodes, it's connection, right? Keeping that community and connection with people, and also not even isolating yourself just to the people who agree with you. I think it's hard, and it's gonna be it's the brave thing to do, is to interact with people who don't have the same opinion as you, and to interact with them and come from a place of understanding and without judgment. But my advice or my tool in speaking with these people is don't throw facts at them. They're never going to listen to you. They've already made up their minds. I think instead what we need to do is ask questions and kind of, I think really what us who have really great critical thinking skills recognize in some of these other people is that they don't have those critical thinking skills. So I think that by asking them the questions, you're taking them down the path where you're forcing them to analyze their choices instead of telling them what to think or giving them the facts. You have, like, it's more about, it's got to be much more like smooth than I don't know how to phrase that,
Yeah.
but you know what I mean. Like, you got to
Yeah,
make them realize on their own a little bit, and they may never, but at least you're trying by asking them the questions. I mean, that's a big thing that I talked to my husband about doing. My husband's a pilot, and he is a first officer, so he's always in the cockpit with a captain. And a lot of these captains tend to be, your old white man, boomer, conservative guys. And they always want to talk about politics, and he has a really hard time navigating it. And that's something I say to him: just start asking questions. Like, you're not comfortable, like, this is what you should do, is just, ask the questions and give your own perspective about your own stories. And I think that makes him feel more comfortable.
Yeah. Has he tested it out yet?
He does, and sometimes he'll try a little bit. My husband's a very passive man, so it's difficult for him. So we're slowly working it. I don't know if he's quite changed anyone's mind, but I do know for him a big thing that comes up is he's had this happen several times where someone has been like, well, why did they change the football team, the Redskins, to the blah, 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 and so my husband does kind of work. He's okay with working if it deals with Native American. He's Cheyenne, and he's comfortable with that approach. I think it's much more personal to him. So, so he tries it there, and usually he can get somebody to realize that they're on the wrong side of that pretty quickly,
Right.
which is nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's one of my big ones. And, reading. I think just keep yourself reading. Obviously, I'm a big fan of books. I think reading not only the nonfiction that's out there, but also reading fiction and recommending those books. Some books like that I've read recently, or I have on my TBR, True or False, a CIA analyst's guide to spotting fake news. I think it's a nice tool to have. I think that's just so important to be able to spot fake news. It's hard. I think we all think we won't fall for it, but I think all of us have fallen for it at some point.
No,
in
for
time.
sure. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You using that book with the kids?
Yeah, I should.
They need it. They
Right?
need it.
They do need it. And then a book that actually my mom, she always recommends is, and this is a fiction book, and it's on my TBR. I will be reading it here this summer. It's called American Dirt by Janine Cummins, and it's a fiction story about undocumented migrants who come to the U.S. from Mexico. And what I love about my mother is she's in a book club. And she is in a book club with people that don't necessarily think like her. But she's out there doing the work of choosing books like this for her book club. So I think that's a nice little tool too. If you've got a book club, you can start pushing some of these fiction stories where it's a little more hidden than throwing something super expressive out there.
I feel like with both of those anecdotes about Robert and your mom, it's like befriend people and like kind of get them to see through a different vessel, because it's kind of like when you bring up politics. That's what I was thinking when you mentioned that. It's like people just have their parroted talking points often, and they just can't leave them. Like, well, but if you can get away from that, but figure out how to, it's like spinach and I don't know, when you sneak it in something.
Yeah, it has to be snuck in.
It's like reading a book like that where they don't feel somebody's trying to be political with them, because I feel like that's half the battle right now, is that when people think you're starting to get political with them, they just completely shut down. But if it's under the guise of social connection, you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's got to be the approach right now. Like, I just don't think you're going to change
Mm-hmm.
it. Things are too polarized.
Yeah.
And like you said,
Yeah.
people have just their heels are dug in. Heels are dug in. So it
Mhm.
has to be little sneakier.
Yeah.
Definitely a
Yeah.
little sneakier.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
people won't feel attacked then, right? Like when you start a conversation and it's already something that it's heated, that could be divisive, but when you take it at a standpoint or at an angle where you're not trying to change anybody's mind, but you're just trying to humanize the
Mm-hmm.
situation, then that is easier to digest in a conversation, um, when speaking with others. So.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's a really good tool. It's hard, that's for sure. It's hard to
Yeah.
have those conversations and to speak with people that have different viewpoints. And I know that there's certain people that can't.
No. Yeah. There's a part of it that's about protecting your own peace too,
Hmm.
you know.
Yeah. I'm not good at that. Not always.
Yeah. It has to be super intentional, you know, it just has to be intentional. Like you have to go into it with a mindset because it is hard. It's hard, especially now in today's climate.
Yeah. It is. Absolutely. Katie, it's been a pleasure. And I wanted to ask you what you're working on. I know you're teaching and you're busy, but I know you have your own project that you've been working
Yeah.
on for a while.
Yeah.
So
Tell us about it.
Yeah, so you know, I love writing. So writing is one of my passions along with books. So I have started writing a book. And a lot of the current events or the current world has been a bit of an influence in it. You know, I think that a lot of the issues that we do have kind of stem from generational trauma or generational gaps, especially between us millennials and the boomers. So I am writing a book that's very focused on women of our generation, but kind of the issues that have been passed on to us by our parents, and how we're navigating our world
I like
with
it.
that. Yeah. So
you're
I'm
navigating the now.
That's right, navigating the now.
So you're writing, how far along are you in writing the book?
So I have finished my draft, and
Oh.
I am editing. I'm editing, which is an extremely slow process. I
Yeah.
had
Yeah.
no idea how slow this process would be. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with it. We'll see.
Well, that's exciting.
Yeah.
And if any of our listeners want to reach out to you, is there
Yeah.
a place where they can find you or they can message you? Are you on the socials at all?
I am on the socials, most likely Instagram. That's my buddy is Instagram. So you can find me on Instagram. I think my handle is KTM Miller 004. It's my maiden name.
We'll
Yes.
put that below in the
All right.
description.
Link it in the bio. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Katie.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for
So
having
happy
me.
I got to talk to you.
This was
But
wonderful.
we got to talk to you.
Yeah, it was nice meeting you. And I have like so many more questions about like Florida and just how politics looks different in each state. But maybe we'll have you on at a later date
that
to
would be
talk a bit
Yeah.
more about that.
That would be cool. Yeah.
Yeah,
There's a lot to talk about.
that's right.
Well, thank you, listeners. If you've reached all the way to the end of our episode, we appreciate you listening to Katie's just informative, wonderful, knowledgeable about all things law, which I am still trying to wrap my head around what she said, but I'll listen to this. I'll listen to this episode a few times, or I'll message Katie later. But anyways, if you all like our content, please like, subscribe, turn on the notifications. What else am I missing, Allie?
Share.
Yeah, share.
All right.
Well, have a
Oh,
good
and
night.
we're at, and we are on Instagram at Navigate the Now, and you can reach out to us by email with the title of our name, navigatethenow@gmail.com.
That's right. Well,
Thank
have
you,
a good night,
Katie.
y'all. Take care. Thank you,
All
Katie.
right, thank you.